Trouble at the White House as President Trump's national security advisor resigns. Michael Flynn quits over his contacts with Russia just weeks after taking office. We'll be getting reaction in Washington and in Moscow. Also this lunchtime, the rising cost of fuel helps to push inflation to its highest rate for 2.5 years, to 1.8%. A bribery settlement and the fall in the pound push engineering giant Rolls-Royce to a record loss. An investigation is underway at a Topshop store where a 10-year-old boy was fatally injured by store furniture. Full steam ahead for the first timetable train service featuring a traditional locomotive.
In the south, she fell for a fraudster, a warning about the dangers of online dating from a woman who lost thousands. And cutting congestion, a new road scheme on the table if one of our councils can put up the cash.
Good afternoon and welcome to the BBC News at 1. It's got to be some kind of record, with Donald Trump facing his first scandal and a top-level resignation just 24 days after his inauguration. His national security advisor, Michael Flynn, has resigned over his contacts with Russia. He's alleged to have discussed US sanctions with the Russian ambassador before Mr. Trump took office, then misled officials, including the vice president, about the conversation. The Kremlin has refused to comment on the resignation, saying it was an internal matter for the United States. Our correspondent Andy Moore reports.
Just over 3 weeks into his presidency, and Donald Trump has already lost one of his closest advisors. This was Mike Flynn at the White House just before his resignation, a lonely figure on the front row of a press conference. Then a cool handshake from Vice President Mike Pence, the man he's been accused of misleading. It was Flynn's close links with the Kremlin that got him in trouble. Here he is in 2015 at a dinner in Moscow with President Putin. But it's illegal for a private citizen to conduct US diplomacy. Mr. Flynn denied that he'd spoken to the Russian ambassador about sanctions before Mr. Trump became president. And on that basis, Mr. Pence went on national television to defend him.
What I can confirm, having spoken to him about it, is that those conversations that happened to occur around the time that the United States took action to expel diplomats had nothing whatsoever to do with those sanctions.
In his resignation letter, Mr. Flynn said he'd held numerous phone calls with foreign counterparts. Unfortunately, he went on, because of the fast pace of events, I inadvertently briefed the Vice President-elect and others with incomplete information regarding my phone calls with the Russian ambassador. Those phone calls have been monitored by US security officials, and some of the detail have been leaked to the press.
People that Donald Trump has disaffected within the national security community, the intelligence community, this is how they fight back. They leak material to the press, and that compromises Donald Trump's ambitions around foreign policy.
Mr. Flynn's resignation came after a series of contradictory statements from the White House.
Yes, General Flynn does enjoy the full confidence of the president.
Just put out a statement. Do you stand by him 100%? Just put out a statement. Do you have full confidence in him? Do you have full confidence in him?
But soon after, the White House spokesman said the president was evaluating the situation.
He's speaking to Vice President Pence relative to the conversation the Vice President had with General Flynn.
Since news of the resignation broke, the official reaction from the Kremlin has been muted. President Putin's spokesman said the affair had nothing to do with Russia and was an internal matter for the Trump administration. But Konstantin Kosachev, who's chairman of the Foreign Affairs Committee in the Upper House, said Russophobia has permeated the new administration from top to bottom. Mr. Flynn has now gone, but questions persist for the president about his links with the Kremlin. Andy Moore, BBC News.
Well, in a moment, we'll speak to our correspondent in Moscow. But first, to Gary O'Donoghue, who's in Washington. Trouble for the White House. Anything worse than that?
Well, it's clearly a huge blow. This man was loyal to Donald Trump through the campaign. He was at his right hand in national security matters, clearly discussing matters day in, day out, multiple times a day. So it is a huge blow to Donald Trump. But it became a choice, I think, a choice between honouring that loyalty and effectively humiliating the Vice President. And it looks like the Vice President won that. The White House are very keen to limit this to the issue of the Vice President being misled. And you can understand that for good political reasons, because there are still wider questions about what Mike Flynn actually said to the Russians, what promises he made to them, what he said to them during the campaign. And those are sorts of areas where the White House really does not want to go.
Gary, thank you very much for that. Let's go to Steve Rosenberg in Moscow. Publicly, not much comment from them, but what about privately?
You know, we often refer to these as extraordinary times, Simon, but this is quite extraordinary. Look at what happened today. The resignation of an American national security advisor has got politicians here in Moscow reacting furiously, actually, and jumping to Michael Flynn's defence. So, for example, at the upper house of the Russian parliament, one senator this morning tweeted that Flynn was the victim of paranoia and a witch hunt. The head of the Russian Parliament's Foreign Affairs Committee posted a message saying that either Donald Trump had been driven into a corner or his administration has been permeated with Russophobia from top to bottom. So the language is colourful, it is angry, and it is because the Russians had high hopes for Michael Flynn. They saw him as someone who championed closer ties between Moscow and Washington. He was known to Moscow. He'd attended a gala dinner here a couple of years ago and sat at the same table as Vladimir Putin. But I detect not only disappointment in Moscow, but also a little embarrassment, because as late as yesterday, the Kremlin was continuing to insist that before Donald Trump stepped into the White House, there had been no discussions, no conversations between Moscow and Washington about sanctions. And today, the Kremlin's comment on all of this was no comment.
Steve Rosenberg in Moscow, thank you very much. Here, inflation has risen to its highest level since June 2014. The rate, as measured by the Consumer Price Index, rose from 1.6% in December to 1.8%. The Office for National Statistics says the increase was driven by higher global oil prices and the fall in the value of sterling. Our economics correspondent Andy Verity reports.
Prices may be up, but it's not yet the consumer who's being squeezed hardest. It's the company that sells you the goods, and even more so, the companies that produce them. Following the devaluation caused by the Brexit vote, this East London brewery is paying much more in pounds for the same raw materials imported from abroad. It's boosted prices by 5%, but its costs have risen twice as fast.
For all small businesses, but equally so for us, we've got auto-enrolment for the pensions coming in this year. We've got a huge business rate increase this year. We're a London living wage employer, so our sort of staff overheads are significant. And on top of that, we've now got a weaker pound, so our imported raw material price is going up and up. So it's a real crunch point for us.
Today's inflation rate is still below the Bank of England's target of 2%, with prices rising 1.8% in the shops. But upward pressure is coming through the pipeline, with prices at the factory gate up 3.5%, and producers aren't yet passing on the much higher cost of raw materials, up by more than a fifth. Also driving prices up is a 17% rise in the cost of petrol and diesel. With that come higher transport costs. But the government points out inflation is still comfortably within the target range.
Well, I'd remind you that the inflation figure announced this morning at 1.8% is still below the Bank of England's target. The Bank of England Monetary Policy Committee is seeking to manage inflation to maintain itself at or around 2%. So when inflation is at this level, the economy should be working well.
The economy is growing much more strongly than opponents of Brexit predicted it would. And on financial markets in the city, the next move in interest rates is expected to be up.
Well, the market sees a real possibility that rates may have to go up before the end of this year. This is very much a reflection of the fact that economic activity has been so strong coming into 2017, and the consumer has held up relatively well so far.
Until recently, price rises for consumers were tamer than they've been since the 1960s. The price of fish, for example, is only back to where it was 3 years ago. So far, consumers have been shielded from paying higher costs, but inflation above the 2% target now looks inevitable. Andy Verity, BBC News.
Rolls-Royce has posted one of the biggest corporate losses in history. The British aircraft engine manufacturer, which employs 23,000 people in the UK, lost £4.6 billion last year because of the instability of the pound and penalties it had to pay UK and US authorities for bribery and corruption. With me is our business editor, Simon Jack. These figures look terrible.
Yeah, on paper, they are horrendous. They're very ugly, the worst figures in the company's 133-year history. But they're being really distorted by a couple of things, which I should explain. Rolls-Royce sells its engines and, crucially, the service contracts get on those engines for 20 years at a time, and always, or usually, in dollars. Now, the company's big risk is that the dollar falls in value, and those revenues, when you translate them back into sterling, dwindle as the dollar falls. Now, if the opposite happens, so they insure themselves against that. Now, when the opposite happens, those insurance policies, and as you've seen, the pound has fallen very sharply against the dollar, then the opposite happens and you have a big charge on paper, which propels it towards a loss. But this isn't cash they're actually handing out. So strip that out and look at the underlying earnings, and they're not quite so bad. They're not great. In fact, profits there have halved. They say old engines are being phased out quicker than they're selling new ones to airlines, and they've had real problems with their oil business, their North Sea business and their offshore oil. So if you look at it, it looks horrendous, not quite as bad. The future looks a little brighter.
Now, some talks going on that could have a huge impact on the British car industry.
Real game-changing story. In the last hour, PSA, which is the company that owns Citroën and Peugeot, has said that it is in talks to acquire Opel. Now, Opel we know here in this country as Vauxhall. So this is General Motors' entire European business. They say they've been in talks for some time. They've collaborated in the past, so they're pushing ahead with that. If this goes ahead, it will mean that this combined company will leapfrog Renault and go into second place in Europe behind Volkswagen. Obviously, a lot of interest there for the 4,500 people who work for Vauxhall in Luton and Ellesmere Port. We're early days yet, but this could be a game-changing transaction in the European auto industry.
Simon Jack, thank you very much. The chairman of Toshiba has resigned after the electronics giant announced it expected to post a full-year loss of £2.7 billion. The company was forced to write off around £5 billion following problems with its American nuclear business. Shares in the company have fallen sharply. Let's speak to our correspondent in Tokyo, Rupert Wingfield-Hayes. What does this mean for their ambitions in this country?
Well, Simon, it has serious implications for Toshiba's projects in the United Kingdom, in particular the Moorside nuclear power station, which Toshiba is a major shareholder in. The company, or the consortium that is planning to build the new Moorside nuclear power plant in Cumbria, is 60% owned by Toshiba. And also the nuclear reactors, the 3 nuclear reactors they're supposed to build there in Cumbria, are Toshiba designs. Now, the company today in a statement said it will not consider participating in the project carrying out actual construction work anymore, and it will seek to sell its shares to interested parties. Now, the consortium itself in the UK has released a statement saying Toshiba remains committed to the project, but that seems to be contradicted by this statement released here by Toshiba in Tokyo, and it really puts in doubt the whole future of that project if Toshiba pulls out.
Rupert Wingfield-Hayes, thank you very much. Police are investigating the death of a 10-year-old boy at a branch of Topshop in Reading. He suffered serious head injuries in an accident involving store furniture and died later in hospital. The death is being treated as unexplained but not suspicious. Our correspondent Duncan Kennedy is in Reading. Duncan.
Yes, Simon, Topshop has been closed all morning. Understandably, the shutters are down. In the past hour or so, Reading Borough Council has issued a statement about all this, saying that it was extending its sympathies to the family of the 10-year-old boy involved. It said that its own inquiry was now underway, alongside that of the police investigation.
This was the scene at Topshop this morning. These pictures show it shuttered with security guards outside. Inside the lights were on, but it wasn't clear if any staff or investigators were there. It was yesterday afternoon police and ambulances were called to the centre after reports of a 10-year-old boy being injured. The police say the incident involved what they called shop furniture.
The police aren't being any more specific when they say that the incident involved shop furniture. All they say is that the boy was taken to the Royal Berkshire Hospital, where he later died from serious head injuries.
The reaction of local people who use the shopping centre was universally one of sadness.
It's horrible. Just feel for his family, I really do. Yeah, my thoughts go out to them, really.
Very sad, very, very sad. For the mother, for the parents.
I feel quite bad for the parents because my daughter's 8, so I think it's very sad actually.
In a statement, Reading Borough Council said, "Our thoughts are with the family during this difficult time. We are contacting all the parties involved in order to carry out our investigation into this tragic incident." Police say the boy's death is being treated as unexplained but not suspicious, and their inquiry into how a child could die in a shop involving shop furniture is continuing.
Well, that shop is expected to remain closed for the rest of today. We've just noticed in the past few minutes that a bouquet of flowers has been put outside in the shopping centre here. The council themselves are sending a safety expert at some point today to start their investigation into just how this 10-year-old boy could die under these extraordinary circumstances.
Duncan Kennedy, thank you very much. Just after 1:15, our top story this lunchtime. President Trump's national security advisor Michael Flynn resigns over his contacts with Russia just weeks after taking office.
And still to come, I'll be reporting from the Settle to Carlisle line here in Cumbria with some wonderful pictures of the first timetabled steam train in England for nearly 50 years.
And in South today, she fell for a fraudster, a warning about the dangers of online dating from a woman who lost thousands and ended up with a criminal record. And nominated for the Oscars of the ice cream world. Is this the best ice cream man in the country?
The Queen has opened a new national centre designed to improve Britain's resilience against cyber attacks. The government says hackers are increasing in their frequency, their severity and their sophistication. And the National Cyber Security Centre will make the UK the safest place to live and work online. Our security correspondent Gordon Carrera reports.
A high-tech tour for the Queen today as she formally launched the country's new National Cyber Security Centre. She was shown round the new centre in London, whose mission is to protect the country against a growing tide of cyber attacks. Cyber attacks, it seems, are everywhere.
Russian involvement in efforts to hack information.
The worst case is that all of our customers' data has been accessed.
China's activities in cyberspace as a significant source of concern.
Hacking that could hamper vote counting.
Hackers targeting governments, businesses, ordinary people. The head of the new centre told me the threats are real.
We've had significant losses of personal data, significant intrusions by hostile state actors, significant reconnaissance against critical national infrastructure, and our job is to make sure we deal with that in the most effective way possible.
So what we've done here is create a room of the near future, and we've got some devices that are all connected to the internet.
The new centre's not just there to protect government, but also people's homes. Its technical director showed me how internet-connected items like lamps and coffee makers could be vulnerable, even a child's toy doll. More and more of our life is moving online. The UK is one of the most digitally dependent economies in the world, a strength but also a vulnerability. And protecting it online in the future will be vital for economic as well as national security. Gordon Carrera, BBC News.
It's called the gig economy, the growing number of people who consider themselves self-employed. Well, today an inquiry has been launched into how they're treated by employers and who should pay their tax. And with 1 in 7 people saying they work for themselves, the potential loss to the Treasury could be worth millions. Our economics editor, Kamal Ahmed, reports.
They are the poster children of the new economy, the companies that drive us where we want to go or deliver our food. Some are more controversial. 0 hours contracts attacked for exploiting workers who have little job security.
I think if we strengthen the voice of employees, that would go a long way.
Matthew Taylor has been tasked by the Prime Minister to come up with a plan for the new world of work. He says that the amount of tax raised by the government has fallen because of the rise in self-employment.
It's clear that to a certain extent what's actually going on is people are creating forms of work for themselves, or businesses are creating forms of work to try to avoid tax. Now, I think what should drive businesses is efficiency, productivity, innovation, not trying to evade taxes. So if we can make the system one where those incentives are slightly less strong, then I think that would be an improvement.
A new study by the union says the government could be losing up to £4 billion a year in lower tax payments. That is made up of £2.1 billion lost from the rise in the self-employed who pay less tax. And then there is the £1.9 billion lost from those on 0 hours contracts who tend to be lower paid.
People are facing a triple whammy. Workers are losing out on basic rights. The taxpayer is losing out on funding for the exchequer to fund our schools and hospitals. But of course the taxpayer is also having to fund a higher in-work benefits bill because very often the self-employment and 0 hours work is so low paid.
Theresa May has pledged not only to protect the rights of people often with multiple jobs, but to enhance them. When Matthew Taylor's report comes out in the summer, expect new rights to decent employment and a duty put on businesses to treat people fairly.
The Chancellor has already said he is looking at the issue of taxes lost. In the budget next month, expect changes as the old world of how much we are taxed tries to catch up with the new world of work. Kamal Ahmed, BBC News.
The father of a British soldier killed in Iraq in 2007 has criticised proposals by the government to scrap the legal duty of care to service personnel in combat. It means they'll no longer be able to sue the government for negligence. The Ministry of Defence says the new scheme will mean more generous payments to anyone injured or the families of those who were killed in combat. Our legal correspondent Clive Coleman reports.
And how old was he when he first started playing the drums?
He was about 9 or 10.
In 2007, Colin Redpath's son, Lance Corporal Kirk Redpath, a keen drummer in the Irish Guards, died when a roadside bomb exploded next to his lightly armoured Snatch Land Rover in Iraq. Colin fought a 6-year legal battle against the Ministry of Defence, eventually winning the right at the Supreme Court to bring an action against the government under human rights law. The MOD's new proposals cover battle and the preparations for it. They include stopping legal claims for negligence against the MOD in the courts, a no-fault compensation scheme for injured service personnel and families of those killed, assessors to value injuries and loss based on expert reports they commission. Nobody disputes that it's a really good idea for service personnel injured in the course of combat and the families of those who've been killed to be spared long and frustrating legal battles through the courts. But there are real concerns about the Ministry of Defence scrapping the duty of care that it owes to soldiers.
The fire brigade, the police, the ambulance service, they all have to go out with equipment that works and the right equipment. Well, that should be the same for a soldier.
And lawyers worry that bypassing the courts creates unfairness.
You've suffered injury. You think that the employer, the organisation, the MOD is at fault, and yet you're asked to rely upon the MOD to assess the compensation that it should pay you for the damage that it has caused you. That's not right.
But the MOD and Defence Secretary remain convinced of the need for change.
What we're consulting on is a way of getting them faster and better compensation so that if the ministry has done something wrong with a piece of equipment, they don't have to spend years suing us through the courts.
His ashes are with me. In his
the MOD's consultation on its proposals ends in just over a week. Colin Redpath hopes that for the injured and families of the fallen, the new system ensures maximum safety and fairness. Clive Coleman, BBC News.
Around 200,000 people living close to America's tallest dam have been told it's still not safe for them to return home. The area around the Oroville Dam in Northern California was evacuated after a hole was found in one of its emergency overflow channels, prompting fears it could collapse. Authorities have now managed to lower the water levels, but they still don't know how long it will be before residents are allowed back. Rising damp holes in the front door and water coming through the roof. Just a few of the problems that an investigation by BBC Yorkshire has found in some social housing in England. Councils have paid out more than £35 million in compensation and legal fees over the last 5 years. Anna Crossley reports.
It's completely mouldy and the wall underneath is completely wet. And even our shoes are mouldy as well. As you can see here, it's horrible.
Katrina pays Leeds City Council around £270 a month to live in a flat which is riddled with mould. Although she hasn't taken the council to court, hundreds of other tenants have. Like Ewan's mum Anne, she says he and his brother sound like this all the time, even though they don't have colds. She claims it's because their rented house in Leeds is so damp. Social housing in Leeds has such a bad reputation that claims management companies are now targeting the city, encouraging tenants to take the council to court. These firms identify properties which are in a poor state of repair and then, for a finder's fee, pass on the tenant's details to a solicitor who takes on the case. In a statement, Leeds City Council said, "We have invested more than £76 million over the last 5 years in measures designed to tackle the issue. However, from time to time there are instances of damp disrepair, and when this does occur, we would always encourage tenants to approach us first before pursuing legal action." At a time when services are being cut, many will question why councils are spending millions on compensation instead of fixing the problems in the first place. Anna Crossley, BBC News.
The half-brother of the North Korean leader Kim Jong-un has been killed in Malaysia. The BBC understands that Kim Jong-nam, who was 45, is said to have been targeted at the airport in the capital, Kuala Lumpur. Kim Jong-nam is the eldest son of Kim Jong-il, who ruled North Korea from 1994 until his death in 2011. Steam power returned to the railway this morning for the first time in almost half a century. A timetabled steam train service will run between Appleby in Cumbria and Skipton in North Yorkshire for the next 3 days. And the first one left a few hours ago with our correspondent Danny Savage on board. Danny, how was it?
Simon, it was great to be on the train this morning with about 500 other people who'd all made a special day out to join this service. I'd say that the scene behind us here at Kirkby Stevens Station probably hasn't changed much since the 19th century when this line was built. And there was that other traditional site on this line today, those steam services running. And the response from people has been phenomenal. At Skipton Station this morning, the sights and sounds of yesteryear pulled into the platform. It's a long time since the mid-morning service on a weekday attracted this sort of attention.
Which coach are you in? Oh, B.
People turned out in their hordes to see the first timetabled steam train in England for nearly half a century.
Tickets and passes here, please.
Standard fares and discounts applied. You'd normally pay a hefty premium for a steam trip, but not here, not this week.
I think it's wonderful. I've just been watching all the steam and the smoke going past the window and it's just fantastic.
Oh, it's great. I thought fetched my wife for Valentine's Day, so it was cheap and a bunch of roses.
So what do you make of the Valentine's present?
Yeah, really good one. Liking it, enjoying it, so thank you.
Oh, look at all these people at Settle Station.
Mark Rand was one of the on-board guides.
I know a lot of this has been done within the railway industry by a huge lot of goodwill and a huge lot of mates' rates for things that are normally very, very expensive. But what price can you put on a day like this? But we might have to wait another 50 years for the next one.
And this isn't just about a trip on a steam train. For lots of people, it's a ride through the Yorkshire Dales countryside as well, and crossing the Ribblehead Viaduct. It was the picture opportunity of the day. Yes, you see this occasionally with special charter trains, but this was really special because it wasn't a premium-priced excursion, and the sun was shining.
Talking to some customers on the train that have travelled from Essex, Norfolk, just for the whole sort of romance of this. And I think, Valentine's Day, the Settle and Carlisle Railway on a steam train, I mean, how better does it get? It's been a fantastic event.
Many people lined the route to see the train pass through. This may be the start of something special on Britain's railways, with the possibility of other timetabled steam services elsewhere. Now, at the moment, the train's up the line at Appleby at the moment. I'll be passing back through here at about 3:15 this afternoon. And there were some disappointed people at Skipton this morning who just couldn't get on. There were no seats left. But there are something like 6,000 seats available on this steam service over the next 3 days. So the hope is that everybody who wants to get on it will get on it. Simon.
Danny Savage, thank you very much. Aberdeenshire Council has apologised after trees were planted in the middle of a football pitch. Well, here they are. Unsurprisingly, the new trees sparked a huge reaction on social media. One person wrote, "Are they playing tree aside?" A council spokeswoman said they'd been planted to boost biodiversity in the area, but they have admitted they were, and they did say this, barking up the wrong tree with plans for this site. There's no tree formation jokes or anything. Let's get the weather. Darren?
Yes, thank you. Serious now. I love that. Changes in the weather today. We haven't got the cold easterly wind blowing, and the cloud is in a different position as well. This was a snapshot of lunchtime yesterday. Move things on 24 hours and that cloud is moving up across the UK from the southwest. Still got some sunshine here and there ahead of that, and some areas of low cloud too. But with the sunshine and it being less windy, it shouldn't feel too bad here in northeast Lincolnshire. But not quite so lucky if you're under all this cloud in Gloucestershire. Not much rain here, mind you. Most of any rain is probably a little bit further north, and that cloud is moving away from the southwest of England. So Cornwall getting more sunshine and possibly eventually into Devon as well. Not quite so good though through the West Country and Wales. A few showery bursts of rain here and there, but very hit and miss. More cloud pushing into the southeast through the Midlands, limiting the sunshine across eastern and northern England. And a lot of cloud for Northern Ireland, most of any rain probably falling here. Probably dry for Scotland, the best of the sunshine in the west, still rather grey and cloudy in the Grampians. As we run through this evening and overnight, we're going to find what's left of this showery band of rain pushing into Scotland, eastern England for a while, and then it turns very misty with some low cloud. Another band of rain arriving in Wales and the southwest later on. So a much milder night tonight under the cloud, except in northern Scotland, where there could be some clearer skies and a touch of frost. But generally the theme through the rest of this week is a milder theme, but there will be a little rain from time to time. And we've got some rain to come as we head into tomorrow then, initially across Wales and the southwest. One or two heavy bursts of rain pushing eastwards into eastern England later on. Further north, the rain not amounting to very much, but after a dull start, there may not be a huge amount of sunshine. The best of that coming after the rain in Wales and the southwest, where we'll see the highest temperatures, but it'll be a warmer feel for all of us. Temperatures widely into double figures. Here's the bigger picture as we head towards the latter part of the week. Instead of an easterly wind, everything is coming in from the Atlantic, hence it being milder. This area of low pressure will bring some wetter, windier weather overnight into Scotland and Northern Ireland. To the south, things much quieter. A bit of a chillier start, perhaps, and some mist and fog patches, but a largely dry day. And we may see some improvements later in Scotland and Northern Ireland. Again, those temperatures 10 or 11 degrees. No weather warnings at the moment. How long is this mild weather going to last? Go online for our 10-day weather forecast. Simon.
Darren, thank you very much. A reminder of our top story this lunchtime. President Trump's national security advisor Michael Flynn resigns over his contacts with Russia just weeks after taking office. That's all from the BBC News at 1, so it's goodbye from us. And on BBC One, we now join the BBC's news teams where you are. From me, good afternoon.